Strangelove is a huge film and a big topic unto itself, but I'm only going to concentrate on one little strand in this segment, which is on the issue of game theory and Kubrick's very sustained argument against it as both a technique and as an ideology. Now, he's going to try to be value neutral and present it in a good light as sort of a kind of value neutral instrumental technique of policy, but he thinks deeper down, and he's very careful how he puts this, but that it is very close to the Nazi ideology of Hitler, because in that case, the German people sort of, absent-mindedly joined in the participation of killing of tens of millions of people through warfare, and that the bureaucracy that grew up under the Cold War tried to use these supposedly scientific, but really pseudoscientific technology and language, and rational choice, game theory, and all these other things were a part of it, and that they presented themselves as value neutral, but in reality, they were sort of committed to this weird kind of death ideology, but try to hide it from the public. And the film is going to try to expose the sheer insanity of the whole thing, because while the theory unto itself actually argues for peace, right? Either you use nuclear weapons or you don't use nuclear weapons. So in principle, it should lead to peace, right? But in reality, it led to this kind of institutionalized terror where people were literally hanging on a thread where hundreds of millions of people could have been killed because of a single error. And the film is a kind of dramatizing that what if scenario if somebody honestly thought, well, we should pull the trigger because it's better to, that we pull the trigger first than they pull the trigger first. And that this has already been sort of inculcated in people's belief systems. And again, through archive sources, there's now a lot of evidence that this is exactly what he thought, that there's something really sinister and suspicious about the way we're even talking about nuclear war, as if somehow we're talking about, playing tennis or football, that it's something that could be won with acceptable losses. And in his mind, something has gone dramatically wrong with the sanity of hundreds of millions of people in both Russia and America, that they think there's something good or right about discussing this in kind of this value-neutral pseudoscientific language. And it's hiding what are clearly these much more primary fears and drives. And that's really what's going on behind policy, but it's being sort of sanitized with this ridiculous ideology of anti-communism, of power politics, of realism, and all this other fancy terms. But it's, for him, it's all just gobbledygook. It doesn't mean anything. It never did mean anything. It's just a lot of garbage that's being spewed by people who have no idea what they're talking about, but just have this cover of patriotism or nationalism or whatever it is, in order to just try to get away from the fundamental fact that they're not much different from either Hitler or the Germans, who helped to participate in the killing of tens of millions of people. But in that case, we can sort of understand, because the propaganda was sort of so overwhelming, that you can sort of at least understand why some Germans may have been honestly, legitimately tricked. But here they already have experienced that, and yet somehow voluntarily they're sort of wanting to believe whoever it is, whether it's the president, the Pentagon, these bureaucrats, these scientists, who tell them that, yes, nuclear war can be, in a way won, and it should be won. And of course, you actually look at the actual method of game theory, and you look at it very carefully through the literature, they sort of slyly admitted this, and I will give credit to one person, Frank Sagaria, because in his actual journal articles, he does come out and completely admit what was pretty obvious even decades ago, which is that, well, all these scenarios rest on a fundamental paradox. Either we will use the weapons or we won't use the weapons. And obviously we're not using the weapons, but we don't have total peace. So the method really never helped us at all. It really just really very closely almost destroyed the whole human race. And so this whole big program, which was spent billions and billions of dollars and tens of thousands of employees, really meant nothing, was a huge waste of time and effort. And to his credit, he sort of admits very slyly that, yes, it was kind of a waste of time doing all this as a study, but, now we know it's a paradox, and we didn't know that before. And that's the whole point of the film, to say that there was this insanity, and it was already recognizable from the very beginning, right when nuclear weapons were first being developed, but yet people really wanted to believe this ideology that, no, there was something real behind it, that the experts knew something that the ordinary people did not. And in reality, we kind of all knew this was kind of a shared insanity. And even though nuclear weapons are still a problematic thing, we are sort of more aware that things could go very dangerously wrong very quickly, just through either intention or accident, because whatever the ideology or the intentional stance of the negotiator, there are just too many factors that cannot be controlled. So the idea that this could be a rational war in any real sense was always a dangerous delusion. And the film is just using these surface jokes about sexuality, the ape-like behavior of the officers and their kind of insane amount of extremist ideology of anti-communism to just illustrate this more common irrationality among scientists. Whether it's economists, political scientists, or physicists, it's the shared insanity that he's really trying to protest against and warn us against. All right, so that does it for Dr. Strangelove and the paradox of game theory during the Cold War. If you like the content, please hit the like button and/or subscribe. Please be safe. Thanks for listening.